Should we defund the police? Do you think police does more harm than good? Or vice versa? Do you think the police do more good than harm? Certainly depends on who you ask. But before we get into any of that, I want to certainly talk about what defund means, because depending on who you talk to, it could mean two separate things. So one thing that I've definitely heard is when people say defund, they're talking about completely abolishing policing as we know it and rebuilding it from the ground up. Some would say reimagining policing. Now, there's certainly another argument that I've heard when someone says defund the police, and they're talking about reallocating some of the funds and trying to put it into like different areas of the community and seeing how they can make policing better. So with that in mind, I want to now get into it and start by saying I'm going to leave the statistics completely out of this video. And you might say, well, when you're trying to persuade people to come to one side, you really should use stats. And that's where I want to say, I want to use this video as less of a sort of debate persuasion style video and more of an open conversation. So treat it as I'm going to lay out my viewpoint, and then I want, if you're willing to do so, in the comments you can let me know what your viewpoint is. So first, let's get into why are people calling for defunding the police? In 2020's case, you have cops being caught on film using lethal force on unarmed suspects, specifically on unarmed black men. That was a very, very big news story this year. You know, a lot of high-profile cases. Something that I'll say in regards to that is you'll always get a news story when it's specifically an unarmed black man, and police are certainly guilty of killing unarmed people of all races, but you're not going to get the same amount of, you know, news drive, that sort of that sexiness to make people click on the story and really have that outrage for it. Doesn't mean that when the police do it, it's justified, but it's just something worth noting. And another reason people are calling for defunding the police is for police brutality reasons. Again, I'm sure you have probably seen videos, not just this year, but in years in the past, of cops using excessive force, right? Things of that nature. And I would say the last reason that people are saying to defund the police is because of their illegal practices. So one, for example, would be, it was a pretty big news story this year, was the use of no-knock warrants, okay? Now, kind of laid out why people are calling to defund the police, or in the event that you are on board with defunding the police, those would be certain reasons as to your argument, right, of why to do so. Now I want to visit the other side of the argument, which is obviously to not defund the police. So the first reason to not defund would be because people feel that policing, whether you agree with it or not, it kind of holds that line between a civilized society and complete anarchy. So what I would mean by that is, whilst there's certainly crime that still goes on, even with the amount of police that we have, the fact that we still do have some sort of law enforcement, you have to think about how many potential crimes it does prevent, because you might have people that are thinking about participating in criminal activity, and in the back of their mind, it could be, well, what if I get caught? What if there's a cop nearby, right? Something along those lines. And kind of branching off and still talking about how police will kind of hold that line between absolute chaos is because I want you to imagine if someone hears a bump in the night, chances are they might try and dial 911 and have someone come to their house and kind of deal with that situation for them. So I myself, I own plenty of boomsticks, and you know, if need be, I can launch some freedom seeds downrange and protect myself and my family until obviously cops would arrive. Now, that's obviously worst case scenario, but that is something that, you know, we practice as a family, and not everyone might be like that. And the last reason why people would say let's not defund the police is because they still feel that cops do more good than harm. And you can absolutely point to examples, and they are legitimate examples, of police using lethal force when it's not required, using excessive force when obviously again it's not required, okay? And we should certainly have some sort of system in place to where cops can be held accountable if it's deemed that they acted in an unprofessional manner. So in an effort to keep this video somewhat brief, I kind of want to wrap everything up and tie it up into a conclusion. So I want to start by saying that we can absolutely demand that the police that we have, that whether they patrol our streets, you know, so on and so forth, they should be the best that we have to offer. okay? And we should want to promote the best citizens that are qualified for the job to do that job, because I don't want to see police using lethal force when it's not required, right? Or using excessive force where, again, not required, right? We want to have them be role models so everyone else in society can look up to them. A potential area where we can start to have maybe some sort of conversation about how we can improve policing would be to maybe have some sort of social worker or a mental health expert to ride along with cops, in the event that they're actually going to be arriving at a scene where they know someone's having a mental health crisis. I think that's something that's at least worth talking about. I'm sure you can get arguments as to why that's good and bad, and maybe you personally have a reason why that might be good or bad, and please, I want you to share, because I really do want to hear different opinions on this issue. Rather than defunding the entire police department as we know it and trying to rebuild policing from the ground up, I think we should promote the best that we have to offer to assume that role. Because if we get better people involved in the police department, sure, they're going to start out at the lowest level, but throughout time, they're going to be able to work their way up the ladder. And slowly but surely, we'll be starting to see that change that we've been desperately asking for. Another note that I wanted to make was that we can't tie cops' hands behind their backs. And I'm already making the argument that I'm in total agreement that we can make policing better, it can evolve, and it can be something that we all look up to. But if we tie cops' hands behind their backs, they're not going to be able to do their jobs, and it's going to embolden more criminals because they're going to be able to take advantage of the situation at hand. So, for example, while there was certainly a lot of chaos erupting, because I think there were certainly news stories that cops were absolutely at fault, when the end result was that you had cops standing down, not showing up to work, or just flat out not doing the full extent of their job because they sat there and said, listen, everyone's filming me, anyone can take it out of context, and everyone's just going to run with the first story that they hear, plus whoever's my boss, or maybe like a city attorney, whatever it is, they're not going to back me up. So no, I got a family to feed, so I'm not going to be putting my neck out there on the line. So that's something that we do need to discuss about how we can find some sort of middle ground. Another area where I think all of us can do better that aren't in policing is whenever a news story breaks and they lead with unarmed suspect, is killed by police, we can't rush to judgment. And I understand it's hard, especially when there's a lot of emotion wrapped up in, these particular cases. But if we automatically assume, well, the cop's at fault, or on the other side, well, clearly that guy or that woman was acting as a criminal, so they got what they deserved. So if we continue to sit on whatever side of the fence we feel comfortable on, and we never try to meet in the middle and wait for facts to come out, we're never going to move forward as a country. We're never going to see policing get better, and that's something that I at least think everyone would want. And I'll end with this. When I first heard the defund the police movement, and people talking about, well, we need to totally dismantle and we need to rebuild it from the ground up, it kind of made me think about America and its origins. You see, because if you know anything about American history, yeah, obviously, there's a lot of bad things that happened in this country. But throughout time, right, we didn't destroy the country and try and rebuild it. We continued to evolve, right? We continued to expand. So we had slavery here, and then we fought a war and wound up ending slavery. Okay, then we had the voting rights, then we had the civil rights, okay? We had to end Jim Crow laws and segregation, right? And things along those lines. And I understand we still have a very long way to go until this place can be close to perfect. But the idea of totally dismantling something and trying to rebuild it from the ground up, I personally just don't view that as a productive way to go about business, because I think in the long run, trying to totally rebuild something is just going to make things 10 times worse. So though I don't agree with the entire defund the police movement, I at the very least want to try and have a conversation now that things have somewhat died down. So on that note, I want you to leave me a comment if you agree or maybe disagree with the whole defund the police movement. Maybe there's some middle ground, right? Maybe you've moved a little bit depending on which side of the aisle you're on. So leave me a comment, let me know what you think, and as always, I appreciate you checking out the channel, and I hope that I'll see you again sometime soon.